Hello, I am the Dungeon Tutor. Welcome. Since 2016, I've been answering your questions, giving advice and inspiration to countless gamers. Here, you can ask questions in the comments and get your own videos as an answer. So I encourage you, enjoy by all means, but come back to visit with your friend, the Dungeon Tutor. Hello friends, I am the Dungeon Tutor. Welcome! Today is day 22 of RPGaDay. The topic for today is ally. Now in role-playing games, allies can be very interesting things depending on what your concept is, depending on what your theme is, depending on what your genre may even be. And in the most general sense, an ally is somebody who is on your side. Whatever that means. Is your ally a hireling, somebody who's on your side because you're paying them? Are they a cohort or a henchman, in which case they like you, they are generally somewhat loyal to you, potentially extremely loyal to you? Or are they a patron? A patron is an ally who expects things out of you but reimburses you with favors and position and maybe gear or what have you. There are a lot of different definitions for an ally, just as there are many opportunities for an ally as well. For instance, a hireling can be, of course, somebody who fills in a gap that a group is desperately in need of. If you are going on a quest and information is crucial and none of your characters are masters of lore, you might hire somebody to come along, say a sage, probably at inflated rates, to be that information resource that your group still needs. And that is perfectly fine. That's an acceptable understanding in a role-playing game that sometimes you might bring in outside help. The need for that has diminished somewhat over the years. Early games of D&D, after the players would find out what the goal is, is it a dungeon crawl, is it an exploration, one of the first things they would then do is go see if their hirelings are still around and if there are any left available. Because the idea of going into a dungeon in those earliest days of role-playing games was tantamount to suicide unless you were going to take only a very shallow dip into the dungeon. Because those extra hirelings, number one, are potentially damage multipliers. Number two, they go down so you don't have to. And since your characters are the most important things in that game, you want to have a couple of extra people around to help share the burden of damage. Even if they die, it's not nearly as tragic if your character dies. So that is one of the more important elements of those kind of games, was having people around to share those risks. And then also to fill in the gaps that you can't do. If you hired a thief to join you, it's to take care of thiefly things. Opening locks on doors, finding traps. Which ironically in those early days, to be reasonably successful at those jobs, your thief had to be rather high level. Low-level thieves weren't very reliable at all. Those numbers were awfully low. And many thieves died trying to use their skills unsuccessfully. It's just one of the facts of the game back in the day. So, hirelings, of course, was something that enhanced your group. They gave you more range of what you could do. A person could feasibly solo a dungeon if they had the money to hire the right people around them. I mean, say you're playing a wizard. Very, very, very fragile, very, very squishy, possibly with a couple of good spells that might be able to end a fight right then and there, but odds are not able to go encounter after encounter after encounter, having a magical solution to everything. And wizards, even backup option of pulling out a sword or laying about with your staff, running away was usually a much, much better option, and it wasn't even close. That really was how you dealt with problems, is by removing yourself from the situation. So, in terms of allies, bring along some, say, men-at-arms or a couple of mercenaries. If you have the money, get loyal mercenaries that you give armor to, and you can do all right. Maybe you will also buy a thief, at least their services, and say, okay, I'll give you, whatever to take these risks. Maybe with an incentive for every time they successfully employ their abilities. That's a good way of motivating them. And if you pay them a reasonable amount so they stay somewhat loyal to you, if your character's charisma isn't abysmal, you can do all right. Maybe even hire a priest, a mercenary priest, for example, who can throw down a heal or two in a crucial juncture. Maybe the difference between catastrophe and success. And again, they cost a lot of money. So the cost to go into that dungeon had better pay off, because that can actually end up costing you money. Although you may end up getting some decent experience out of it, and it may be something you feel that you end up having to do. Those kind of allies are solid. Now, in modern days, that's rarely a concern. A balanced group of players generally covers the bases, so they don't need any hirelings. But what if you're doing a group that has some, a fairly radical concept, like everybody's playing a cleric. Everybody's got a cleric of one of the various schools. It's a weird idea, certainly, but it's a valuable one. Many clerics can fight fairly well, much like fighters. Many of them have buffing abilities that can make them sometimes the equivalent or the superiors of fighters. And depending on your school and everything, you may be able to deal out damage like a wizard, or, there's a variety of means that you have at your disposal with clerics. But they don't generally deal with traps or open doors successfully well without having to blast them apart or chop them down. Many times they aren't so useful in nature, not like having a good druid or ranger might be. So they may look for someone else to come forward. And maybe they even do hire some extra muscle to stand at the front while they unleash whatever. They might, of course, make that muscle a bit more amplified by casting spells to buff them, and certainly to heal them after an encounter, so that they can go through an encounter after encounter after encounter. That's always possible. So a hireling like that can be invaluable to a group who chooses to focus on one thing. Now, if you win the loyalty of someone, such to the point that they want to follow you, they want to help you, and it isn't as much about being paid an allotment, that would be more of a cohort or henchman. And even then, they're risking their lives. They're probably going to want something out of it. It's often to those characters that a share, maybe a half a share of the treasure, is offered to such a person to keep them around, to keep them happy, or perhaps the person they are henchman to ends up paying their expenses. That can be sometimes the cheapest way of doing it, because then that character can almost be run by a player, and they take care of all of their statistical information, their combat effectiveness, and so on. And that's been a very popular option for people who have very, very one-dimensional characters. A person who wants to play a wizard who doesn't want any attacking spells. When combat breaks out, they may want a bodyguard. Somebody who can get in there and fight while the wizard is doing other things like observing the area with magical detection so they don't get surprised, or, other ways that they can participate that isn't going to have a dramatic impact. They may choose to have another character that does the fighting for them, that does interact with combats. And that can be a very useful way of keeping a character that's often sidelined for certain elements of the game involved with the whole thing, when they have a subordinate character that is doing those types of things. In addition, cohorts often will fill in another role, and that is to emphasize how cool your main character is. If you have a cohort, you have somebody who trusts you enough to trust their lives to go into danger with you. That's a pretty big deal. That's not a minor thing. That's a person who trusts you to keep them alive and uses their skills, their talents to your benefit. And that is actually a pretty cool thing. And when it's done without that person, having ulterior motives or anything like that, it can leave a character feeling like, hey, I'm one step on my way to everybody seeing how cool I am. That I have this person here singing my praises or what have you. And if you, as a game master, want to, give players a little bit of a sense of, getting better and growing more powerful and everything, put out a cohort. Put out somebody who thinks they're great. And even though they don't maybe get into combat because they're already killy enough, for instance, make them somebody like a bard. Somebody who sings their praises and goes ahead and announces their presence, or maybe socially blends into a town that maybe the players don't have characters that are really good at that. They go into town and they find out what the players would want to know about that town or city. Does it have cultists in it? Is there a great opportunity for the group that they should look into right away? Make them useful, and the players will warm to them and love them. I would advise you to give them a very limited stat block, however. A basic attack is all you really need. If you want to go full-blown, by all means do it, but the idea is not to make your job any more complicated. If you make them a full spellcaster with a full spell list, for instance, I mean, if you want to, but realistically, that's probably more than is necessary for a character that, unless you are determined to use them to fill in a spellcaster block in the group. Only a couple of spells, like a cantrip, that they'd be willing to use at a moment suffices mostly. A bard, for instance, who only uses, vicious mockery. We love vicious mockery, don't we, folks? I'm going to tell you this. Vicious mockery at the right time can change the face of an entire combat. That disadvantage on attacks is brutal. And again, the saving throw, even if they're really, really charismatic, it's amazing how people can just fail those saving throws in the middle of nowhere, even if they have really good resistance. It still can happen if you hit them every round with another vicious mockery. And if you aren't the type to make vicious mockery interesting by making it personal, by using your own original insults and mockery, then any other characters you can make and have their big bonus that they're always helping another person. Boy, is that a magnifier. Here, get advantage on this. A warrior suddenly finding that they're having a slump, just not hitting anything. The right person coming up with their sword and saying, okay, let's attack together, aid other. And boom, they get a roll with advantage. Boy, can that be a turner. That can make a huge difference for a cohort or a DM NPC, really. And then finally, of course, we have patrons. And we already talked a little bit about patrons, but it bears thinking about in that hirelings and cohorts and henchmen all work within the same sphere that the game master uses as far as around the players. So when the players are out doing something, their henchmen, their hirelings are there. What patrons do is they give the characters reach beyond what they have in sword range or spell range. They can be manipulating things behind the scenes. They can be creating opportunities for the group. And that all works nicely if the group has a fully realized world around them and they have goals and motivations that aren't necessarily best served with a good sword swing. So it's important if the players buy into your game that you give them the means to manipulate that world and to find information. In other words, plot hooks you want them to go and pursue, but still they should be things that are applicable to their interests. And those patrons can be fundamental allies for a group as they work to spread their influence. And it's not necessarily changing the world. It's not necessarily, fighting crime or whatever. It is, however, funneling the best bits of information back to your players through means other than what it occurs to them to think about. because as a game master, you have those kind of outlets to help your players and to kind of give them a curated tour through your world. If they choose to not follow it, that's fine, but you are demonstrating that the world lives and breathes without them, and that things go on, and they can count on the world being a little bit more realistic, a little bit more fulfilling, with all the things that can happen within. So, just a thought. I think these the use of allies in a game is oftentimes limited to just people who swing swords along with you. Nope, the whole thing of anybody who's sympathetic to your group and is working to get you a success, they're an ally, just different sizes and levels and theaters. So, maybe this gives you something to think about, hopefully. And I hope you liked this video. If you did, feel free to like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. Leave a comment if you have a particularly memorable ally that you want to remind us of, or memorialize if perhaps they didn't make it, as sometimes happens. But whatever happens, we would love to read your comments. Bring it into the conversation. Maybe we'll even have a video based on something that you leave behind. But I do hope to see you again. And there's still some more RPGaDay yet, so we'll hopefully see you there. And I hope that between that happy time and now, that you, yes, you, get a chance to roll some dice, to play some games, have some fun, but stay safe, everybody. Until that next time, farewell.